we are halfway through the fantasy season. And with that, you got to start thinking about, the upcoming schedule, whether you're sitting pretty, whether you need to make some moves to get yourself in contention. We're going to be talking week 9 buys and sells on this here TFA podcast. Before we jump into it, whether you're listening to us on podcast form or on the YouTube channel, please be sure to subscribe, rate and review if you're listening on podcast form. It really means a lot to us. You guys have been awesome this year. The engagement that we've been getting has been crazy. It's been a lot of fun. So with that out of the way, Kev, why don't you go ahead and jump into your first buy for week 9? Who are you feeling? Who's someone that you're going out and trying to acquire in fantasy leagues?
All right, for me, it's pretty simple. I typically don't like to buy quarterbacks because I'm much more of a proponent of streaming. But for me, I think that I think if there is some options out there that are viable. Last week I talked about Carson Wentz because of his playoff schedule. Now the quarterback I'm going to be talking about also has a fantastic playoff schedule. And so those are the guys I'm looking for. If you don't have Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, and that's probably the list. And if your quarterback you have right now has an awful playoff schedule, then I would probably be looking to make a move right now and maybe sell that quarterback and then try to buy this quarterback. And Lamar Jackson is the guy I'm talking about. Lamar Jackson certainly has regressed this year. We kind of knew it was coming with him, but it hasn't been, the world's ending. He's still 11th in fantasy points per game, but when considering you probably drafted him in the second or third round, that's not what you were looking for. And that's why we always talk about not wasting heavy draft capital on a quarterback. But with that being said, a lot of the numbers are still there. He's still running the ball at a pretty high rate. He's first in the league in carries, second in the league in carries per game, first in red zone carries, second in rushing yards, and then he is 7th in rushing touchdowns with 2. The passing volume has been the problem, which is pretty similar to what it was last year. He wasn't great in the red zone line, or he wasn't a quarterback who threw the ball at a higher rate, and he's not this year. He's only averaging 27.1 attempts per game, which is 27th in the league. He's 31st in pass plays per game, so that's really hurt him. And not to mention, the schedule has been pretty brutal for them so far. So far, if you go back and look, he only has 3 QB1 weeks this week in the 7 games that he's played. So I think that's something people should take into consideration. Now, well, I say all that to say this, that if you look at the Ravens' schedule, especially the fantasy playoff schedule, it's fantastic. It's the Browns, the Jags, and the Giants. Like, that is fantasy goodness right there. And if you look at his upcoming schedule, even before that, the only tough matchup they really have the rest of the season against the Steelers, and that is right before the fantasy playoffs start. But they have the Colts this week, the Patriots, the Titans, the Steelers, the Cowboys, the Browns, the Jags, the Giants, and that wraps up the season. So, and I think right now you could probably buy him for a decent price, certainly much less than what you would have, something like last year. So if you can buy Lamar Jackson right now, I absolutely love doing that. The fantasy playoff schedule is absolutely amazing. And I think you probably look for him to really kind of elevate himself and get him back into, where he was last year, and probably has a strong finish to the fantasy schedule. So if you can buy Lamar Jackson, I wouldn't give up the house to do so. But, if you have a quarterback that has been outperforming, like an Aaron Rodgers type or something like that, and offer them for Lamar Jackson owner, I would be inclined to do so, because if I can get a rushing quarterback with the ability that Lamar Jackson has, I'm okay with doing so. So, yes, I am buying Lamar Jackson.
I'm actually going to piggyback right off of that, and I'm going to talk about Mark Andrews for a lot of the same reasons of what you were saying. Like, I set out to talk about Mark Andrews as like a contender buy, right? Like, if you're already sitting pretty at 7-1, 6-2, you have a strong team as is, and you can afford to, to have some of those weeks where he's not completely hitting. Because if you drafted him in the 3rd round. Up until this point, he has 3 top 3 tight end weeks. He has 1 tight end 2 week. And his other 3 games, he's actually been a tight end 3. Like, not great, Bob. That is not what you drafted anybody in the 3rd round for, let alone a tight end, whenever you can get so many of these guys later on after that. But with, like I said, with Mark Andrews, everything else surrounding him is still looking good. Like, I think he's 4th in target share. among tight ends, like fourth in air yards. Like all of the opportunity numbers are still there for him. You still believe in the talent. You were talking about the fantasy playoff schedule he has. That's what I really like about him as well. Mark Andrews is somebody else who I am definitely looking at. If maybe if you have somebody that's overperformed, maybe if you could add to somebody like a Robert Tonyan plus, see if you can kind of get to the Mark Andrews owner if they're frustrated, if they're someone who it isn't sitting pretty, if they're sitting at whatever 500 right above, right below, if you can go and snag away Mark Andrews from him, that's something that him or her, that's something that I'd definitely be looking to do.
No, I totally agree, and I also think that if you can buy Marquise Brown, I would also look to do so. Like I think this whole entire offense and on the pass catching side is something that I'm willing to invest in. Whether it's Lamar Jackson, whether it's Mark Andrews, or whether it's Marquise Brown, I think all three of those guys I think are terrific buy lows right now. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my next guy, and that is at the running back position. Now I'm going to talk about David Montgomery. So if you look at David Montgomery again, it's kind of the theme of this show is this schedule that they have coming up. The Bears have had a pretty rough go of it in terms of the schedule they faced. I mean, they've had to face the Bucks, the Colts, the Saints, the Rams. They've had some tough matchups in terms of facing run defenses. But I'm going to be honest with you, like this schedule sets up pretty nice. So now that they get the Titans this week, the Vikings, the Packers, the Lions, the Texans. Oh, that's going to be a good one. The Vikings and the Jags to finish out the season. Like it is David Montgomery season coming. Right now, he is first in the league in broken tackles. If you look at his opportunity share, he ranks 11th right now among running backs. He's 9th in carries, 4th in targets, which if you'd have told me heading into this year that David Montgomery would be 4th in targets come week 9, I'd have fucking told you to get the fuck out of town because you're lying. Okay. But right now he is, since Tariq Cohen's been out, he is seeing a large number of targets. The problem is right now he is 25th in fantasy points per game, but a lot of that has to do with their schedule. So if you can get a running back like this, I think who's going to really pop off. He's a workhorse running back. He's somebody that's not going to take you heavy. Somebody you're not going to go out and give up the farm for. So I do really like David Montgomery. I think his schedule is fantastic. Like I said, first in the league in broken tackles. He's 8th in evaded tackles. There's a lot to like here on the David Montgomery profile.
It's just so typical 2020 that like last week was the week that I was like, you know what? Nope, completely off David Montgomery. The matchup is not great. He's had the smash matchups and he has not performed. Then he goes out. He looked really good against the Saints defense. So that's just super typical. But I'm actually going to jump into another RB2-ish kind of running back, someone who you're also not going to have to give up the farm to. And this is definitely somebody I would go after if you kind of went the anchor RB approach in your draft where you just want, kind of one stud running back and then waited at the position. And that is Phillip Lindsay. Now, Lindsay only has like 90 fewer rushing yards than Melvin Gordon does on half of the carries. Yes, Lindsay has missed the two more games than what Melvin Gordon has, but still, like that is bonkers that he has just 90 fewer rushing yards on half the carries. Gordon has 90. Phillip Lindsay has 45. According to playerprofiler.com, Lindsay's true yards per carry, which is a metric that they use, is 5.7, which is second in the league. And Gordon is sitting at 3.9, which is 43rd. Lindsay is also 7th in yards created per touch. Gordon ranks 29th. Now, the only downfall to Phillip Lindsay's profile and why he's not someone that like I would like that I'm not like dying to go get, but I still think that there's a lot of value with him is something he does lack is the passing game involvement. He only has 4 targets all year, which is kind of, you want to talk about the difference between David Montgomery and Phillip Lindsay. Lindsay only has the 4 targets, only 2 catches. He's only running about 9 routes per game on average, where Gordon is averaging 20. But like I said, Lindsay can easily provide RB2 value at like RB3 or possibly even cheaper prices going forward. So Phillip Lindsay, like I said, is somebody I would target if you went that kind of stud and dud approach at the running back position during your draft.
No, I agree. That is wild. And, like you talk about with David Montgomery, it's he is 5th in receptions right now. He is 7th in receiving yards. And even more crazy is that he's 8th, or, he's 2nd among all running back in routes run. 2nd. Like that was kind of the biggest problem with David Montgomery heading into this year, was going to be like he was not going to be utilized in the passing game. And we're getting that. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with that he struggled because of the schedule that he's faced. And so he's also 12th in the league in goal line carries. Like, he's getting all the work. And now that they're going to get a much easier, lighter schedule the rest of the way, like, I think David Montgomery, and you could buy him pretty cheap right now. I think you could get him at probably a bargain basement price because he just hasn't performed that well. And I think people are probably getting tired of him. So I think you can really take advantage of some of your league mates, and they're going to come back cursing your name in a month from now, whenever he's crushing. So I love David Montgomery. So anyways, let's move on. A couple other guys we've hit on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Nick Chubb, we've said it now, I think for like 3 weeks in a row now. It's almost confirmed he's going to be back next week, week 10. So the window is probably closing. You're probably going to. I still don't think you're going to have to pay what you normally would pay for a top 5 running back to acquire him, but the price is rising every single day, every week that goes by, because he is definitely he's 100% going to be back next week. Miles Sanders, same boat. They're on bye week. They're going to be back next week. I think you could acquire him for a little cheaper than I think it's not a huge edge, but I'll talk about a running back that I think you could actually sell to acquire both of those guys. And I think even Aaron Jones is also probably an option in there. So if you're running back, I think those are the guys you can look at. A wide receiver, Michael Thomas is the guy that I'm going to talk about. Michael Thomas, people are done with Michael Thomas. Like, everybody wants to trade him. People have been trying to trade him and move on from him. He returned to practice last week, which is good. And I think that he is probably going to play this week. They play the Buccaneers on Sunday Night Football. I think you could probably expect for him to return this week. So again, I think you could probably get him much cheaper than what he probably should be going for, because he's missed so much time. I think the fantasy owners just want to wash their hands of him. And I just don't think he's going to cost as much to acquire as he typically would. Right? I mean, last year he was an absolute monster, and I don't see any reason why he can't continue doing that once he comes back. So I think Michael Thomas is a great buy low right now, or buying lower than what I think he typically would go for, because last year, if you were to try to trade for Michael Thomas, you're going to have to give up a ton, a war chest of assets to be able to acquire him. I don't think you're going to have to do that right now. I think you offer a wide receiver who is vastly outplaying maybe like a Robbie Anderson plus something like that, where I think you could probably get somebody to do something like that. And so for me, if you can acquire Michael Thomas, and I've been seeing a lot of people, with trades for Michael Thomas, whether they're trying to trade him or acquire him, I think he is somebody that you could easily move. I would love to say a guy like Zeke Elliott, because Zeke Elliott you could almost get for nothing right now, but it's just so hard to trust that offense. So that's why I kind of went with Michael Thomas. Like, I think Michael Thomas buying window is still open. I think after this weekend, it's going to be officially shut again, or you're going to have to pay a king's ransom to acquire him. So again, I don't think you're going to be able to get Michael Thomas for free or much, significantly lower like you probably could have a couple of weeks ago. But as of right now, I still think that you could probably buy him for a pretty good price.
The wide receiver that I have, who is on the absolute polar opposite of what Michael Thomas is, someone who doesn't have the name value, someone who definitely didn't have the draft capital, and that is Travis Fulgham. Now, whether or not you believe he's legit or hashtag good, that is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. This is what matters. Since he made his first start back in week 4, he is tied for 6 in targets, 6 in catches. He's first in receiving yards. He's 5th in air yards. I think he's tied for first in touchdowns with like Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill with 4. And the thing that matters the most, drum roll please, he is wide receiver 1 in PPR scoring since week 4. Now he's because of what he has done, he's not going anywhere no matter who is healthy, no matter who comes back in that Philadelphia offense. I think the addition of Reagor and Goddard and, at some point, hopefully, maybe Zach Ertz, all that helps him. His role is safe. He's not going anywhere, and you're not going to have to give up anything close to the level of production of what he's giving you because of, his name is Travis Fulgham, and nobody knew who the hell he was 4 weeks ago. So this is how we were talking about the Ravens kind of were buying that entire pass game. The Eagles are someone that we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks as well, with how nicely their schedule is setting up the remainder of the year. So Fulgham, Goddard, Rager, Wentz, Sanders, I buy all of them because of how nicely it's setting up for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I really like the Eagles as a whole. I think their offense is one that's going to really take off, and that's why I was so high on buying Carson Wentz, which I still am. I still think you could probably buy him, especially now that he had a bye week, or now he's on bye week, and he had a down week last week, or at least not as what people were expecting from him. So, I think Carson Wentz would be a guy. I think one other guy that I did want to mention I forgot about was Diontae Johnson, just really quickly. He's been boom or bust. Week 2, he had the 23.2. Week 7, he had the 29 fantasy points. But other than that, he's put up 9.7, 0.9, 0.8, and 1.6. So I think Diontae Johnson could probably be had pretty. I think maybe a wide receiver 3 or something like that might get the job done for people that have Diontae Johnson. People are getting fed up with Diontae Johnson. And, 2 of those games, week 3 and week 5, he left because of injury. He had the concussion, and then he got hurt in the other game. Now, last week against Baltimore, they're playing Baltimore, one of the best secondaries in all of football. I mean, the Steelers' offense as a whole did not look very good. They kind of got it going in the second half a little bit, but the defense really played a bigger part in that. If you can acquire Diontae Johnson, again, I think you can buy him low, and I'm all about that because I think that over the second half of the season, I think you can probably expect, as long as he can stay healthy, some more big weeks coming his way. So I do really like Diontae Johnson. So I think that's all we have for the buy. So I think maybe you just want to jump over to the sells. Who is your first sell?
Well, you kind of brought his name up in passing, and I'm going to talk about selling Zeke Elliott. Now, you're going to be selling low. There's no doubt about that. He's had 2 shitty weeks back to back. DiNucci is starting again. They're going up against the Steelers this week. None of that sets up well. You're not going to get anywhere near the full value of what, especially where you drafted him. But this is one of those scenarios where I'm willing to sell low, like almost whatever I could get. Now, obviously, if you throw him out there on your trade block, and the best offer you get back is fucking Ross Dwelly, I'm not going to go that far. But if you can get like 70-ish, 60, like 65% return on from where you drafted him, I'm just willing to bail at this point. According to Sharp Football Stats and what they look at for the actual defensive metrics for the rest of the season, the Cowboys have the hardest rush defense schedule the rest of the way. The easiest matchup they have is against the Bengals. I think they're at Cincy that week, and Cincy is actually only giving up the 13th most fantasy points per game to running back. So it's not even like that. It's just like a dream smash matchup. So Zeke is someone I'm just willing to kind of bail on. And this is no matter whether you're sitting pretty or, you drafted somebody like Zeke, and let's say in the second round you came back and took, Kenyon Drake or somebody, and now you're kind of like trying to get scrappy and make your way into the playoffs. No matter what my record is or the situation of my team, he's someone who I'd be willing to just, take the loss on just to get rid of and get off my team and kind of move on and try and shake some things up and frankly just get better production in my running back spot.
It's so tough too because I think right now you could, like you were saying, you can buy Zeke so low, and if you do if you look at their schedule, I was actually gonna think about putting him as a buy low this week, and then I go and look at their schedule, and I'm like, yeah. Because they play the Steelers this week, as we know. Then they play the Vikings, which I don't think that's a terrible matchup. I think you can run on the Vikings, especially now that they've gotten rid of Ngakoue. But then after that, they have Washington, Washington has been great against the run. Yeah. Then they have the Ravens, who have now just gotten better because they've acquired defensive pieces. Bengals, that you mentioned. Then the 49ers, who have been really good against the run.
Despite all their losses, somehow they're still only giving up they're giving up second fewest fantasy points per game with losing all the pieces they have.
Yeah, and then they get the Eagles in the last week of the fantasy playoff. So it's just not going to be easy sledding for Ezekiel Elliott, and this offense continues to look horrible. So I can't do it. I can't, the hard part is like, what are you going to be able to get for him? And I think that's the tough part. Maybe what you do is go after like a guy who like David Montgomery. I actually think that, you go to the guy who has David Montgomery, and I actually think you could probably make that happen. Now, am I just doing David? I know it sounds crazy. I know people are going to be like, I'm sure we got somebody in the comments that's going to, are you fucking kidding me? You're not giving up Zeke Elliott for fucking David Montgomery. But at this point, I mean, I think you probably get a little bit more than David Montgomery, probably David Montgomery plus maybe another piece. Like you're not getting like some great move, but I think you could make that work. And I would much rather have David Montgomery at this point than Zeke Elliott because these matchups are so fucking awful for Zeke Elliott. This offense has been so awful. So unless something crazy happens and Andy Dalton comes back and all of a sudden, because it could be Cooper Rush this week, or it could be DiNucci again. I don't fucking know, but this offense is gonna be terrible and they're placing the Steelers. So I can't do it. So, anyways, for me, it's pretty simple. The guy I have on here as a sell is Adam Thielen. He's currently wide receiver 13 in fantasy points per game, but he really shouldn't be because right now he is 20th in the league in targets. He's 46th in the league in routes run. Like it's just not good. And now that Justin Jefferson is becoming more and more involved in this offense, and this is a team that wants to run the football. Right now, this team ranks 32nd in the league in pass plays per game. Like that is not good. And if you have somebody like Irv Smith who's becoming more involved, and Justin Jefferson who's becoming more involved in this passing game, it's just not good news for Adam Thielen. And he's not going to see those steady, consistent targets that we're looking for. And if you look at the last couple of weeks, I mean, he had 14.1 against Atlanta week 6, Green Bay, where they just dominated on the ground, 5.7. Against Houston and Seattle, he had 26.2, 29.3. So he's had 3 really good weeks, 29, 26, and 29. But I just think he's a really solid buy candidate right now, just because with all these other options, with the fact that they don't really run the ball, he's like I said, he's 46th in routes run in the league, 20th in targets. Like it's just not what I'm looking for my number one wide receiver. I think he's going to be too boom or bust, and I just don't think that's something I would want to mess with. And I think you could actually get a pretty nice return for somebody like Adam Thielen. And so that is why I'm selling Adam Thielen right now.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to hear you lay some of those numbers out for somebody who's been performing the way that he has. I'm going to throw out another kind of running back that I'm just willing to wash my hands of, and that is Leonard Fournette. Now, if you were watching the game on Monday, obviously after Ronald Jones coughed up that fumble, he was effectively benched. I saw him in there for a couple of plays, but it really wasn't many. Fournette saw 51 snaps to Rojo's 17. And I think this is the kind of like back and forth that we're just going to be dealing with all year. Like if Leonard Fournette comes out next week and he fumbles, it's going right back to Rojo. Or if Fournette misses a blitz pickup and Brady gets smacked around like that, it's just going to keep going back and forth, back and forth. It's basically just going to be like if whoever isn't fucking up that week is the one who's going to get the touches. So I would just put him out on your trade block. Hopefully you have somebody who hates, Ronald Jones and thinks Leonard Fournette. Like if I would go back and see if you can find like in your chat of like, Fournette's here, Rojo's done. Find somebody like that who was high on Fournette, low on Rojo, and see if you can flip him to that owner and just get rid of that headache altogether. Like I said, outside of like a season-ending injury, I don't see any clarity coming to this situation at all. And these are the kind of situations where I'm basically just looking to completely avoid if I can. So if you can find someone who's willing to bite on that, I'd be trying to get rid of Leonard Fournette after what just happened on Monday night.
For me, the last two, I have 2 more running backs that I have on my list, and that is one. I don't know what you're exactly going to be able to get for him, but I think Jonathan Taylor is somebody that maybe actively shop. Listen, Jonathan Taylor, I don't care. Like he's been like the topic of fantasy Twitter all week. People, and as we know, I have behind closed doors talked about Jonathan Taylor and said that he is the next Trent Richardson, and I've said it, and I'm going to say it again. Like I'm saying it now. Like this guy looks like a fucking bust, and I don't care what people say about Trent Richardson anymore. Like I'm so tired of hearing about Jonathan Taylor and 8 weeks is enough, and I get it. 8 or 7 games isn't a ton, and I understand that. But eventually, you have to start looking at a player and say, okay, there's something wrong here. whether you want to say it because the fucking systems he's in, I don't give a shit. Like he's in a committee. This is what Frank Reich has always done, but this is what people always talk about. And then I'm sorry, I know Cody, you're a dynasty guy, but I'm so sick and fucking tired of hearing about draft capital from people. Like draft capital ends once the season starts. Once they're drafted, who gives a fuck about where they're drafted? We see players all the time that get drafted in the first, the second, the third round. The teams end up cutting the next season. Just because they were drafted in the second round doesn't mean that we're just going to hold on to this guy forever. And it feels like to me, and the dynasty community, again, I'm not trying to trash the dynasty community, that they hold on to players for too long. And it's, he still has value and blah, blah. Like, it's like right now, I'm sorry, that's not fucking disputable. James Robinson is a more valuable asset than what Jonathan Taylor is. I don't give a shit if it's in Dynasty or if it's in redraft. It's ridiculous. James Robinson has produced on a terrible team, on a terrible offense, and it continues to produce. Now, people want to say, Jonathan Taylor and Miles Sanders, they're really similar players. You go back, let's look at Miles Sanders from last year. Fucking Miles Sanders was getting 11 touches a game. Jonathan Taylor is getting 18. 19 touches a game. The guy's looked terrible this year. He doesn't have any vision. He's not hitting any holes. Like, he looks like a terrible runner. Maybe it is the Wisconsin thing. Maybe he's just another Wisconsin running back that's not very good. And people need to, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Just let it go. Like Jonathan Taylor is who he is right now. He's unstartable unless you're absolutely desperate, because it's a committee and you have to have the high-handed approach, and that's it. So if you can move Jonathan Taylor, fucking move Jonathan Taylor. But don't hold on to him because the hope that maybe he actually does something. Like, he's had good matchups. The Detroit matchup was one of the best that he's had. And I know what people are going to say, well, they said after the game he was a little nicked up. Like, get the fuck out of here with that. Like, come on. The coach didn't know about it, but all of a sudden, apparently, okay, fine, whatever. But he still looked like ass all year, okay? There's no denying it. At this point, he looks like he is a Jordan Howard type running back, okay? I know he's tested better than that, but we've seen athletic running backs be able to do stuff like that and have never done anything. So get the fuck out of here with Jonathan Taylor. I don't want to fucking hear about it. Jonathan Taylor, to me, he's done. He's Trent Richardson. He's a more athletic Trent Richardson. And that's all I got to say about that. The other guy, actually, ironically, is James Robinson that I want to sell. And that's not because of James Robinson, the talent. I want to sell James Robinson because of their upcoming schedule that they have. It is not good. They have the Ravens, the Bears of the last 2 weeks of the fantasy schedule. They have the Steelers coming up. So the Browns, who have been good against the run. They have some really tough schedules to really deal with. But James Robinson has been amazing. I actually think you could probably sell him for quite a bit because he's really outproduced what anybody thought he was going to be able to do. He's fifth in the league at fantasy points per game. He's number one in the league in opportunity share, 8th in targets, 11th in weighted opportunities. Like, the dude's been legit. Like, he's been really good in the face of an offense that's been so fucking bad. But with this schedule that they're going to have coming up, I think that he is somebody that I would look to sell high on. I think you could acquire a Miles Sanders, a Nick Chubb, an Aaron Jones type running back for James Robinson. I would much rather probably have those rest of season than James Robinson. I still think James Robinson has some good games in him. This week against Houston's a great matchup. So with that being said, I think if you can sell high on James Robinson, I wouldn't hate that.
One, we don't have time to get into the dynasty discussion. We don't have time to open up that can of worms. But two, I would potentially think about holding James Robinson for like another 2 weeks because of how their schedule sets up, and then try and trade him. But right now, if you can get that full return on James Robinson right now, I wouldn't hate that either. But especially if you're fighting for points and you're trying to make your way up in the standings to make that playoff push, they have the Texans and the Packers next, and then they get the Steelers after that. So if you can hold on through these next 2 weeks before sending him off, I would look to do that. And speaking of the Steelers and someone you touched on as a buy, I'm going to talk about Chase Claypool as a sell. Now, if you missed the trade window from a couple weeks ago where Claypool went off, it was like 40-something PPR points. The next week he had 18. The week after that was when he had just that complete dud. And then this past week, I think he had like 15 fantasy points. He scored he scored a touchdown, had a handful of catches, like 50, 40 something yards. But anyway, the trade window has opened back up. But something that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about is the rise of Juju back into the fold. If you look over the last 3 weeks, Juju leads the team in basically every stat, catches, yards, targets, whatever. The only thing, air yards, even the only thing that he doesn't lead in is touchdowns. We've all seen the extent that Diontae gets involved whenever he's on. Last week was a down week for him. I think he only had like 3 targets, but he was second on the Steelers in snap percentage. So that was just one of those kind of, one of those weird weeks for him. But Deontay's obviously involved a bunch. Ebron has his moments where he's involved. If Juju's back to form, like I think it's just going to be really hard to confidently plug in one of those guys and feel great about it on a week-to-week basis. So if someone, if you can find someone who really wanted Claypool, you didn't trade him, I would go back to the person who was, who was climbing up that tree, knocking at that door, trying to get Claypool off of you, and see if you can get rid of him at this point. Because like I said, there's just going to be the proverbial, the cliche, a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. And I think a lot of that has to do with Juju, especially if he is coming back to form. Well, that is going to do it this week for the Week 9 buys and sells. If you are catching this on Wednesday at all, we will be going live Wednesday night on YouTube. 9:45-ish. Going to be going through. We're going to try and do some start sets for you guys, but you guys have just been absolutely crushing us in the comments with all your questions in a good way. So we'll be going live to get you that first look at maybe the Thursday games, answer some of your waiver lineup decisions, trades, all that stuff. So please be sure to head over to our YouTube channel. Just search for the Fantasy Authority. Subscribe to us over there, and we will see you guys live on Wednesday. Talk to you soon.